Hello! How is everybody? Is everybody having a good day? I hope everybody's having a good day. I hope everybody had a good 4th of July, a good weekend, and that their Sunday is restful and they can recover. That's my hope, anyway. Let's see. I kind of threw open the doors a little on my Google Plus account, which feel free to friend me on Google Plus if you want, and asked what I should ramble about tonight. Wasn't feeling all that inspired. I didn't sleep well, so I thought I'd toss open the option to my friends to, give me some suggestions of things I should be talking about tonight. One of them was a friend who suggested that I should talk about Chris Perrin. I don't know Chris Perrin that well, but he seems like a nice guy, and he really does have a love for giant robot mecha, so that puts him in high esteem as far as I'm concerned. If you can't love your giant robot mecha, then what can you love, really? So, there's that. But other than that, I don't know him that well, so I can't speak to, as his friend, how did he put it? I want to make sure that I got it correct, because I don't want to slight the fella. Mark Reed suggested that I should talk about how awesome Chris Perrin is. And that if I didn't know him, that I should. I've sort of dealt with Chris Perrin, in the periphery. He's in the gaming space on Google Plus, and he seems like a nice guy. I don't know that if I've met him, I may have met him at Gen Con a few years ago, but other than that, I don't think I know him personally. But he seems like a nice guy, so he's pretty awesome in that regard. Okay. Now my friend Bill Cotis, because we all call him Bill. No, William Cotis, lovely fellow, one of the funniest guys I know, actually, and loves Battlefield Earth more than is healthy for any one person to love. I wanted to talk about the upcoming Mobageddon, which I assume he means the massive online battle games are becoming so prevalent and so huge that they're going to trump all the other games ever. I'm not a big MOBA fan, I'll be honest. I've tried a couple here and there. They're okay. They're kind of fun. But the communities around them, even the best and nicest of them, tend to be somewhat unforgiving to people who don't know what the hell is going on. And it has a steep learning curve a lot of the time. So they're also, the thing I like about games is story, and while they do have cool stories, and I'm still trying them, don't get me wrong, I still try them from time to time, and they do have some cool backstory. A lot of the time the experience of the game is such that you can't really enjoy the backstory that much during the play of the game. So there's that. But my friend Colin, who's in New Zealand these days, tells me there's a League of Legends bar in New Zealand, which is kind of awesome. Gaming bars are a thing. I'm happy to hear even ones for games that I don't actually play that much are popular. So there's that. And the bulk of my discussion today will be about fantasy games that are not D&D or Pathfinder. My friend Jamie Dockery suggested that, and I think that's a really cool subject to talk about. So I'm gonna talk about that for a bit. First off, let's start with the simple, basic premise. Almost any game can be made into a fantasy role-playing game. almost. The base system, at least. Really, you just have to decide that's the setting you want to play in and adapt the rules to reflect this. Fate, Core, almost all the examples that they give in the book are from a fantasy setting game that they were playing in. So, the characters in the illustrations often are fantasy characters. So, I mean, they certainly recognize that was a kind of play that people would want to do. And honestly, I would play a Fate Core fantasy game. I think that's kind of a neat. It works well. Almost every game I can think of that has a sort of generic element to it, I've seen ports that indicate a fantasy game. Cortex Plus has several fantasy game write-ups in the Hacker's Guide. So, you've got that. And of course, Champions has Fantasy Hero. GURPS has more fantasy settings than I care to think about. I actually have a warm place in my heart for Hero System. I know some people don't like it because it's a bit rules heavy, but I like the fact that it is generic enough to reflect a lot of things, and Hero Fantasy or Fantasy Hero, whatever version they're on now, like 5 or 6, I can't remember. It's fine. It's a good way to make a game, honestly. But those are, that's sort of a generic thing. They do have a setting, I believe, that they wrote up for it. But given the nature of the rules are given to a generic set. So they're not exactly going to have a lot of flavor built into the rules describing the world itself and making it fit within the world itself. It's more like, well, you want to describe a world, here are some rules to describe them. One generic system semi-generic system I would actually really enjoy, really would enjoy a good fantasy game using the rules, is World of Darkness. I think World of Darkness rules are excellent for that kind of thing. And, Dark Ages, Vampire, back in the day, was, well, as the kids say, the bomb. I loved that setting, and if you aren't seeing that as a fantasy setting, you aren't thinking hard. You've got, all kinds of magic going on. You've got vampires running around. You want to play a human in that world, that's perfectly reasonable. But even without that, using the World of Darkness system to do a hack for a fantasy role-playing game is perfectly doable. It's not actually all that hard a reach to get there. And actually at some point I want to do a hack for World of Darkness for a setting idea I had for a long time ago, and I may get around to doing that, and I'll talk about it here when I do. Now, I don't think this is what Jamie was talking about, though. Generic games can be used to make any setting if you put in the work, right? So you can do like science fiction settings or sort of Cthulhu-esque 1920s settings. You can do all sorts of things with a generic system. There are games that are built to be fantasy games. There are several out there that are not D&D. There's Torchbearer, which I haven't seen, but I've heard good things about. There's 13th Age, which is essentially D&D, with some modifications. Significant modifications, but it pulls from D&D pretty solidly. And there are a lot of old school revival games that are essentially D&D with some tweaks to them to make them feel like the old D&D that we all remember. Now, and you're going to find a lot of those floating around. A lot of, well, this is actually just sort of D&D. We've shaved the numbers off and made it closer to the rule set we liked, but it's still just D&D. And that came out of the Edition Wars and the Old School Revival and all of that. And you know what? That's fine. They're probably fun. I haven't played a lot of them, but they look like they'd be fun. But there are a few that are sort of unique in and of themselves. The Mouse Guard game, a friend of mine ran that for a while, and that has a unique take because you're playing mice. But it's a fantasy setting. You know, they're fighting snakes and wolves and what have you. But that their monsters are natural world monsters, but it is sort of a fantasy setting, and I think that's a really cool one. It's a really interesting one. Dungeon World. I hear a lot of good things about Dungeon World. What little I've seen of it looks pretty awesome. So I'll definitely tell people to check that one out if they're interested. There is Warhammer Fantasy. Now, here's the thing. I remember the old Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game, which had a lot of charts, and you could go nuts, and it was actually kind of entertaining, and it was fun. But it's still, stuck to sort of standard fantasy role-playing game tropes in a lot of ways. I played the new one where they have the custom dice to it, and the custom dice, you roll the different dice to fit into the game. And honestly, I didn't have fun. I think part of it is I like being able to look at my dice and have an idea of whether or not I can succeed. And there's something about the custom dice. Even though I could understand the math of how they work, eventually, it didn't feel like I knew what was going to happen when I rolled my dice. And that felt uncomfortable. I felt like I was off-put by the dice being so odd in that regard that it broke me out of the game, and it inhibited my ability to enjoy it. I only tried it the once. I may give it another shot sometime, but the one time I didn't really like the rules that much. And that may just be on me. Some people probably loved it, but for me, it just didn't do anything. And then there are a few that I have tried that I really liked. I do like Earth Dawn. It's delightfully weird at times, but and sometimes the rules are not well designed in some places, but overall, I think it's a really good setting. I think the setting's really compelling, and that would be enough to get a lot of people interested. And I'm going to wrap up with a few that I love, absolutely, adore. First off, Pendragon, if you haven't checked it out, definitely worth checking. It's a very different experience. You're playing an Arthurian knight, but you're also playing with some generational things as well. So it's definitely a different experience from D&D in a lot of ways. But the one I can think of right now that is possibly my favorite non-D&D fantasy role-playing game, just, published to be a fantasy role-playing game, I would probably say Dragon Age, but I haven't actually had a chance to play the Dragon Age rule set, but it looks a lot of fun and feels very old D&D for me. But this Song of Ice and Fire role-playing game. And by the way, I love that Green Ronin will publish the sort of pocket editions to their books as well as the big editions. It's very handy. But yes, Song of Ice and Fire. I had a lot of fun playing this game. A friend of mine ran it when I lived in North Carolina, and we had kind of a gaming all-star crew there. Lee Hammock, who actually wrote portions of this book, which I believe is up for some awards, so check it out. Night Watch, very cool game. This is the game that is set in the world of Game of Thrones, and I love a lot of the conceits of this game. I love that the base game at least, you're playing characters in a noble house, and a lot of the base threat involved and base goals involved are boiling down to trying to keep your house intact in a time of, upheaval and possibly war, depending on which era you play in. And we had a blast playing this game when we were all working at Icarus. It's easily one of my favorite games I ever played in. So part of my warm, fuzzy feelings may be due to the fact that the game I played in had such a great crew involved. It's easily one of my favorite fantasy RPGs ever. And in particular, as an alternative to D&D, it's excellent. There are people who love Rollmasters. It's okay. A little too chart heavy, I think. I've played a bunch of others that aren't coming to me right now. What was the other ones? Palladium made a fantasy role-playing game, which was a D&D ripoff, honestly, with Palladium's skill system attached to it. Let's see, what else? And, there's the sort of generic high fantasy stuff. You can call Dresden Files a fantasy game, but I don't think that's what Jamie meant. I think Jamie meant, epic fantasy, Conan-esque sword and sorcery, maybe, but, somebody has a sword, and somebody's wearing armor, and look, there's a dragon, and that kind of thing. Dresden Files doesn't fall into that category. It's more of a modern fantasy. I think that one of my favorites right now that isn't D&D is Song of Ice and Fire. I think that the only problem with the game is most game masters don't want to be anywhere near as mean as George R.R. Martin is to his characters. 'Cause, it's bloody awful, and the whole time we were playing with Lee, we were waiting for the shoe to drop. Okay, when does it get ugly? When do we all turn into, piles of goo on the floor because somebody betrayed us, or, we walked into the wrong encounter, or something like that. So that admittedly is one of the problems. But, a lot of the rules are involved with creating a house and maintaining the house. They've got rules for mass combat and things like that. There's some fairly complex rules about doing social maneuvering as well. So there's a lot more to do than just, let's go explore a dungeon. It's a much more fully realized world in that regard, and you have lots of things that you can do in it. So I definitely recommend it. And I've gone super long, so I'm going to call it. Y'all have a good night, and subscribe, like, share all my friends' stuff. Friend me on Google Plus, and, drink more. Just saying. More drinking. Night.